a name. Just make one up out of whole cloth right there and say, that's Timmy.
And then that operator that signed the name, ends his tour, goes back overseas. Somebody looks at his logbooks later, doesn't realize this, right?
Right.
Yeah, and doesn't realize that he just assigned the name to him.
Correct.
Yeah.
He doesn't realize that Timmy isn't a real pilot. Timmy is a moniker for a made-up name of somebody who they just don't know who it is. And there are historical accountings of this having happened in the past. If we look back at World War II, U.S. forces in Guadalcanal, they started calling, oh God, what is it? It was Japanese pilots who would start running night missions, and they of course didn't know who they were, and they started nicknaming those pilots Washer Machine Charlie. And that was because they were flying two-engine planes, and those engines were slightly out of sync. So if you think about, if you've ever been on a two-prop plane, exactly, a two-prop plane, it's just, it's very consistent, but when they're not, they do make kind of that boom, 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 back and forth, rocking washer machine noise. So they nicknamed him Washing Machine Charlie. In European theater, there was Bed Check Charlie, who was German pilots who were known to go out just before or just after dusk and run night runs as well, and the name was given because it was just after lights out. These guys would show up, and these guys the U.S. forces hated them because if you knew that Bed Check Charlie or Washer Machine Charlie were coming, you just had to lay there all night long. You didn't know if the bombs were going to get you or if they were just going to explode around or near, or because their accuracy was crap.
Yeah.
But it really struck a note of fear in those men on the ground.
Yeah, but that does seem like a better way to name people that you don't know instead of making up a colonel name.
Colonel Toom.
Yeah. It sounds a little made up, right? And if it's Colonel Toon, then it makes even more.
Somebody was being funny.
Yeah, that it was like a play on cartoon or whatever.
Yeah.
But assigning some name that nobody could ever think, oh yeah, that's the real name of that pilot, like Washing Machine Charlie. Like nobody's ever gonna look at a record and be like, wow.
Yeah, good
That's a
point.
weird name.
How many Washing Machine Charlies did the Japanese have?
Yeah.
I didn't know washing machines were in use.
Yeah. So that just, for me that doesn't really follow, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and I don't think that if his name actually, if he assigned the name Tomb, T-O-M-B, I couldn't see them quite assigning that to another pilot because you're kind of giving him, you're assigning this name that sounds pretty badass.
Yeah.
To us.
And we're not.
To us.
Yeah, pretty badass. So just like you're not going to name some other Colonel Death or or anything like that. You're going to name
Sasquatch.
Yeah,
you're not going to be
something...
like, this unknown guy, the Punisher.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
You're not going to do that. You're going to call him something. You're going to deride him. You're going to
like
something
Colonel
derisive.
Choopy?
Yeah. Exactly,
Yeah.
Colonel Choopy. Or Colonel Sideways, or something like that. Well, not that one. That's pretty badass. What am I saying?
Actually, it's pretty hokey.
Yeah, okay.
I've met that colonel.
But you see what I'm saying?
I do. I totally get it.
But at the same time, of course, it's over the radio. He's speaking in a foreign language, and so Toom could have sounded like Toomba. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of ways that you can try and enunciate that to make it make sense, but it doesn't make sense. It's too close to the real thing for us English speakers to just ascribe that to a name from another language that we don't quite understand.
Yeah.
The other problem with this theory is the fact that, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, pilots didn't train and fly a lot in different aircraft. If you were a MiG-17 pilot, the program was you flew the MiG-17 to be the most proficient MiG-17 pilot you could be.
Oh, yeah.
Not you flew a MiG-17 and, oh, by the way, we're also going to train you on a MiG-21 maybe something else, and you'll just be kind of an okay pilot overall, but not really good in any one of them. That wasn't the way it worked.
That's really true. It's like, because, it takes a long time to get really good at an aircraft, and it's like if you switch to the 21, you're throwing away a lot of good experience. You're taking some of it with you, obviously.
Yeah.
But you're throwing a lot away, too.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
No, I
yeah.
mean, I totally agree with that. I think
Yeah.
in kind of theory, for the sake of argument, you could say, this guy's racked up 6, 7 kills in this kind of crappy
Yeah, time to
thing.
graduate.
The lower performance
and maybe,
model.
and who knows, maybe he one day was like, oh yeah, let me take that other one out for a spin, and was equally good, and they were like, you can have this awesome one
Yeah.
if you think you can kill more dudes with it.
It could have
I mean,
been. I suppose in that case, let me take it up, see if I can kill a few American pilots, and he did. And so, okay, I guess you get it.
Guess you get that one
I guess you
now.
get the 21. But
Yeah.
typically that was not. And the Soviets, I think, were running their Air Force.
They were.
And,
Yeah,
and
I
that
can't
is not
imagine.
Soviet doctrine at
No.
all.
Well, no, and if
So,
you remember, keep in mind though, it's the controls are not going to be the same from one model to the next. It's getting into. I'm just going to pick on Chevy. You get into the little itty bitty Chevy car, the little 2-seater that is a pregnant roller skate, and then you jump up into their giant SUV. The general basics are the same, but things are not exactly the same, and they're in different places, and it's all going to be a little different. And you're going to be really not that good in the big one when you just got out of the pregnant roller skate one.
Which
Well,
we're good at.
Yeah, well, and that's why I'm just saying for the sake of
Yeah.
argument, I guess it's technically feasible, but highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Seems that way to me.
Though, I guess I could see the kind of accidental, they just assign that call name to any pilot they don't know that kills somebody, and then that would make sense that it was either plain, they oftentimes didn't know the call sign of the pilots that were actually, striking their aircraft. And that would also explain why it was Tomb, right? Because they were like, oh crap, this unnamed Tomb, the Tomb guy came again and took down one of our aircraft. And
The Tomb Raider.
Well, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that it was an accidental recreation of this
It's
guy.
a
but it was-
moniker given to a pilot who scores a kill, but we don't know who that pilot is, and it
Exactly.
gets repeated over and over.
Yeah.
And as the beginning of the theory said, then becomes when somebody else finds the logbook a year later, holy cow, this guy is a badass.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
could have been. Or, actually, this is another theory that's out there on the same whole it was a myth thing. And I found this theory on 21stcenturysocialism.com. Yeah, I did. For real. I'm not
I believe
joking.
you.
Yeah.
I know you
And
don't make this stuff up.
The theory is that the Colonel Tomb was actually a creation of the U.S. Navy, whose planes these were. And they created Colonel Tomb and created this big legend and then had him killed as a big morale booster. It's like this legendary pilot, and we killed him off.
Yeah. I can see that. I can understand it. It seems pretty weak, and it seems kind of hard to. That would take a long time to build up, especially when you consider how often guys are cycling in and out of their tours of duty.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to let that run for at least a year, if not 2, before you pull the final lever and kill him off.
Yeah, I know. That is kind of the whole thing about it. I think 21stcenturysocialism.com's viewpoint was like, here it is. Here's the perfidious, U.S. once again, coming up with this big lie, about,
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and so,
Of course.
Yeah, so I kind of suspect they probably made it up, or some commie made it up. I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
That was a perfect lead into the next theory, because the next theory is that actually Colonel Tomb was a piece of propaganda, but he was a piece of propaganda created by the North Vietnamese.
Yeah, kind of like carrots.
Yeah. Carrots?
Carrots?
Well, I don't remember during which war it was, but it was right when the U.S. had come up with night vision technology or some
we've talked
radar
about this.
technology.
Yeah.
But they just started doing this propaganda thing in America where they were like, carrots will give you great vision. And that's not really actually true.
Is it? Oh, really?
But they were trying to cover up the fact that they had this advanced technology, and that's why they were being successful overseas during the war. So they just kind of went with it, and now it's like part of the
Our guys
war.
have great vision because they all eat carrots.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
I remember talking about
I remember that when I was a kid. That was kind of like the accepted wisdom is that carrots were good for your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns out that's wrong.
Yeah.
They're
Well, I mean,
terrible
they're
for your eyes.
they're not bad for your eyes.
I'm
but
sure. Yeah, carrots
they
are not
don't
going to hurt you.
actually give you like supervision or
No.
anything.
And you won't go blind if you don't eat them. So
You might.
no.
Depends on how else you're eating.
Okay, don't listen to that, boys and girls.
Yeah,
Devin's
eat your
making
carrots.
that up.
No, you should eat
so
your
the
carrots.
The theory is that indeed the North Vietnamese made this particular pilot up, as Joe would say, out of whole cloth, and they did so because, as we've already established, we were listening to them, and they knew we were listening to them. So
Of course.
they said, hey, why don't we go ahead and make some crap up,
Yeah.
because nothing screws up the enemy than a giant stinking pile of bull that
Yeah,
we make up out of nowhere.
Well, and wouldn't be that hard. So, on all these different runs, you send one of the pilots is just named Colonel Toom.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. Yeah.
Well, and the other
it
thing-
looks like Colonel Toom is just everywhere. And,
Well, and the other thing that they can do is they can, and what would be easy to help leverage this, is that there was always a commander of the squadron, and that commander didn't always go up. But let's say that they made the gag that if the commander's not actually in the air physically, you say he's in the air and you call him something that then is badly interpreted. And that's, again, we're going back to this, this interpretation of a name that is given. And maybe they had a half dozen different names that they used, and Toom just happened to be the one that stuck for the U.S., because it turns out Colonel Pinky wasn't all that scary of a name.
Or, it could have been an inadvertent thing on the part of the North Vietnamese. It might turn out that Colonel Toom is kind of, Vietnamese military slang for venereal disease, say, for example. So the pilots are out in their bombing run or whatever, and they're killing a little time on their way there. And one of them says, "Yeah, looks like I'm getting another visit from Colonel Toom." So, and so maybe that's it. Maybe that's all it was. They're just talking about
that is
their
the
VD.
dirtiest answer I've found to this story
Yeah.
yet, and I like it a lot.
I was going to say maybe it was something they were competing for. Like, whoever on that run gets the most kills gets to be called Colonel Toom for the next run.
It's true.
Yeah.
And then that helps also explain how they racked up so many kills under that moniker.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I do have to say, though, there is a gigantic problem with this theory, and that is that the North Vietnamese government, or the Vietnamese government in general, because they're a unified country now, does not let any opportunity to promote the deeds of its patriots to pass them by.
Oh, of course not.
And if this guy were as proficient and good as the records in the stories say, then he should have had, as Joe said earlier, statues erected. And
at least one.
And we've talked about this on another episode, and you two know, is that I just got back from Vietnam. I was in the North, I was in the South, and I saw placards and billboards accounting to the deeds of everyday people during this conflict. And granted, it was the 50-year memorial or anniversary, so they were putting out more of this. But what we would consider little acts of heroism were made giant scale. So this guy that is now on a giant scale of heroism of beating back the Americans, there should have been a lot of stuff. They wouldn't just pass the opportunity by to trot him out and say, look at our great pilot.
I'm sorry, I don't understand how that follows this theory, because isn't this theory that he was total boogeyman made up by the Vietnamese?
Yeah.
It is, but if he was made, it doesn't make sense that they would have made him up, because they would elevate anybody who was doing good on their side. So it seems weird.
So the architect of the scheme would at least get a note.
Something to that effect. Yeah,
well, here's the
somebody would have got recognition.
The other problem I have with this theory, too, is that you make this big, scary boogeyman to scare the pants off the American pilots and stuff. You don't kill them off, right? And they killed them off. Why would they do that? And,
well, I mean, they may not have killed them off. It may have actually just gotten to a point where they found out through their moles in the U.S. intelligence that the U.S. thought they had actually gotten Colonel Toom because he shot down the right number, right? Because that was one of the planes that was identified as him. And they thought, all right, we'll just let them. This is too much. This has gotten out of hand. Let's just let them do their thing.
Maybe. Well, and there's some pilots that were believed to be Toom, and we're kind of going off script here, and that's fine because we do this all the time. There was at least one, if not two other pilots that for a long time were believed to have been Toom, and those guys were actually retired from the pilot seat. They were taken out of the air by the Vietnamese military and said, listen, you are too valuable to us. You have to train the next generation of pilots.
Sure.
And so then they became a trainer. And these guys, if you look through the records, you can find, this guy retired after the war to here and did this, and this one did that. But again, we know where those guys were, and they're talked about. They didn't just disappear. So it seems weird that they would just invent him and then let him go. And I guess my problem with it is that if they did invent him and then they let him die, what a better way to stick a finger in the bad guy's eye than to say later on, oh, hey, by the way, Colonel Toom, he was total crap. We made him up, and we're going to now celebrate the fact that we fooled you with this giant campaign of crap.
Yeah, we punked you, Uncle Sam. Ha ha. Yeah,
Uncle Sam's not good with getting punked.
Yeah. Fair enough, yeah.
But, Uncle Sam must be used to it by now.
It's true.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not buying this series for the reason that they wouldn't kill him off.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't buy it.
All right, so it's a bad TV plot line.
Yeah.
Anything else on this particular one, Devin?
Nope.
Cool. Okay, well, let's go on to theory number 3, which is that Colonel Toom was, in fact, real, but he was not a Vietnamese pilot. In matter of fact, he was one of their allies' pilots. As we talked about earlier, both the Chinese and the Soviets were in country and helping the North Vietnamese. And, as with equipment and advisors. And we do know that in at least one other war, which was the Korean War, there were Soviet pilots fighting in that war, in the air.
Yeah.
And we do know also that in the Vietnam conflict, there were Soviet guys running different battle stations and battalions on the ground. So it's probable that this guy could have been, from another country who was a neighbor country that was an ally country. Of course, nobody's ever come forward. Now, the Soviets, they're pretty big on coming forward and taking credit for what they've done. Mm-hmm. So it seems funny that they didn't do it. The Chinese are a little less so, at least in the past.
Yeah, no, I assume that they were communicating air-to-air in Vietnamese, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, there was no Slavic language in there, or no traditional Chinese or Mandarin in there. So as far as I'm aware, it was all in Vietnamese.
And so I don't know. I'm assuming that a Chinese person would have an easier time learning Vietnamese than a Russian, but I don't know. Or at least speaking it without a heavy accent. But again, I don't really know.
I think that it is a similar foundation. Actually, I know they're a similar foundation because the Vietnamese language and the Chinese language do thread back like 500 plus years ago before they split apart. Yeah. And the Vietnamese do have Chinese characters as kind of decorative symbols to represent things. Although from what I understand, they can't read them because they read their language, not the Chinese language. So yeah, it is possible.
Yeah, so
it's possible what you're saying.
More likely Chinese than Soviet.
Yeah.
But just because somebody's Soviet doesn't mean they can't learn to fluently speak a language other than their own.
Absolutely. I'm just talking about speaking it so well with so little accent that the guy listening on the other end can't tell that you're a foreigner. I would just think the Chinese would have a better chance of getting away with that than the Soviets.
And I don't know, but the thing is again, nobody has ever come forward and made a claim.
You would think somebody would have, huh?
Unless they did indeed die in the conflict, but even then you would think their government would say, oh, hey, Uncle Sam, we pumped you.
Unless it was, Russia, and they were, coming out of this thing, they were like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't really behoove us for relations to admit that this guy who killed a bunch of their people was actually our guy. Maybe it actually politically makes more sense for us to just keep that under wraps and not really, talk about it.
And that would explain why both countries would then kind of sweep it under. Vietnamese don't want to say, oh yeah, well, our best guy, he wasn't our guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And like you're saying, the Soviets really don't want to bring light to
Or
it.
China. I mean,
China, yeah.
the politics are a thing that we
I
have to
hate them, but they are.
But I mean, that's just diplomacy is a thing that
Yep.
we have to take into consideration here as well, because it's certainly possible that at that time in the history that they just thought,
No, I think that, especially